In this video, we're going to take our code from the last series of lessons. We're going to delete out anything related to the red variable boolean in our two functions. Okay, so our blink red LED and blink green LED functions. Remove those variables red, and then we're going to come back up here. And rather than using a comparison on a boolean variable, we're going to delete that, and then we're going to scroll all the way up here to line 5 and also get rid of our boolean variable type. In this video, the focus is going to be placed on another type of data called an integer. And rather than using a comparison statement in if, just based on true and false, we're going to compare the remainder and check, is that remainder equal to 0? And we're going to use a function that can give us the remainder. Okay, so what we're going to do is look up on Google. Okay, so this is a handy thing to do. I'll open up a new tab. We want to look up on Google how to calculate the variable. Okay, because often you're going to start reaching into problems and getting stuck, and you can either ask me or someone else in the class, but Google is your friend. So we could do something like calc or calculating the remainder in, and we're in Arduino. So let's just type that in. Let's see what we get. And you can see that right off the bat, remainder operation calculates the remainder. That's pretty cool. So let's click on that and see what it does. And it brings us to this Arduino website. And this is a great place to introduce this. Okay, so the Arduino website has a bunch of functions, variables, and structures that you can use in your code. Okay, so you can browse around in here and explore what are the possibilities of the platform we're using. And every once in a while, I'll point these out and link you back to these so that you can go and extend your learning or even get used to how this setup works. Because often when you use new programs or new platforms, you have to do a little bit of research to understand what you're doing. Okay, so we can see it has this percent sign, and it's considered an arithmetic operator. Okay, so think arithmetic, think of algebra, and it says that the remainder is calculated, okay, when one integer is divided by another. So we have to remember that we're using integers for this function. Okay, this is called the Modelo function. Don't know if I'm saying that right, but we can look down here and see if int x equals 0, and we can see some examples here. It says x is equal to 7 modulo 5. Well, now x actually contains 2, because if you go 7 divided by 5, you're going to get a remainder of 2. So it'll actually store the remainder value of 2 into x. We can see down here, and this is going to be useful for what we want to do, if the number is divisible by itself, we can see that the remainder contains 0. Okay, that's pretty handy. The remainder of 0, 5 divided by 5, that goes perfectly, so it should just be 0, no remainder. And we're going to use this to try to skip count. Okay, so that's going to be sort of what we're trying to do in this lesson. So we're going to go back, and I just saw something here. It says notes and warnings. The remainder operator does not work on floats. Okay, that's going to be a different data type in the future. And if the first operand, okay, so if our first number is negative, the result is negative or 0. Okay, therefore the result of x divided by 10 will not always be between 0 and 9 if x can be negative. Just something to be wary of. So we're going to scroll back up. We're going to back up one. And on Google, if this goes back, here we go, slow computer today, we can see that Arduino also has another site here, and you can see it's Modelo. Okay, so let's go use it, or it might be modulo. I don't know. I've always just used it, never actually had to say it out loud. So we'll go back to our code. I think it was this one. Sorry, there we go. And we have to remind ourselves that we're working with an integer at this point. So let's just declare an integer, and the data type is int. And for the variable name, we're going to call it counter. We're going to keep track of a number, an integer. And to start our program off, we'll equal it or set it to 0 and use a semicolon. Now we have a variable called counter of data type integer, which starts off at a value of 0. And you'll notice, I didn't talk about this in the last video, but you will notice that I keep my my variables, integers, booleans, floats, anything that's a variable, up here above my setup. Okay, so common practice, put your library, put your object declarations, then put your variables up here in the top header region of your code. So that way everything gets nice and clean it gets set in the memory properly. It's all available before the setup even runs. Okay, so do all that up here. We're going to scroll down here now, and in the if statement, we're going to ask, is our counter variable? Okay, so remember our counter is currently equal to 0. Is our counter, sorry, I shouldn't say, is it divisible? Yeah, we're going to ask, is our counter divisible by 2? Let's do it that way. Okay, we're going to skip count, and we're going to blink our red LED on everything that can be divided by 2. So if a number can be divided by 2 evenly um, with no remainder, we're going to ask, is the remainder? So when I go counter modello 2, it's going to return the remainder. We're going to ask, is that remainder equal to 0? The number 0. Okay. You'll notice that I use a double equals. When we use a single equal sign, that's sets. When we use a double equal sign, that's an actual comparison. Okay, so it's not going to set 0 into this number or this variable. It's going to ask, is this 0 equal to whatever we have over here on the left? Okay, so that's our comparison. So if our counter variable, remember our counter is equal to 0 right now, is divided by 2, we're going to check its remainder and see is it equal to 0. So if we go 0 divided by 2 right now, we're going to get 0. So it's going to be 0 equals 0, and that's going to come back true, and it's going to turn on the blink red LED. That's great, but we need something to make that counter variable increase, to increment. And that is another function. I won't go into it in this video, but we can type something like counter plus plus. You can find this on the Arduino website I referenced earlier, and you can find it on a lot of websites, Stack Overflow, different things on Google. All it does is it takes our current counter variable and adds 1. Okay, so the first plus is to add, and the second plus is to add 1. Okay, if I want to decrement or decrease, I could also use minus minus. Okay, but for today we're going to use plus plus. How this is going to work is when we push it to our Prizm, you're going to see the red blink as it comes through, and every time the red blinks, it's going to be a value that is divisible by 2 with no remainder. So 0, if it comes down here as 0 divided by 2, remainder is going to equal 0. You can try that on a calculator or your phone. And 0 is going to then be compared to determine, is it equal to the actual number 0. If it is, it'll blink the red LED. It'll then skip this else block because we've completed the first statement in our if, and then it's going to increment our counter by 1. So now this counter is no longer 0, it's going to be 1. So then 1 will get passed in as my counter, and if I go 1 divided by 2, well, that equals 0.5. So I have a decimal, so that's a fraction, that's a remainder, okay? And 0.5, well, you know what? That's not equal to 0. So it's not going to blink my red LED, it's going to blink my green LED, okay? So try it out. Try to walk through it a few times on paper. We can look at integrating a serial print statement in here to maybe use our serial monitor to help us out with this concept. Um, Diving a little bit into math here, but it's a good idea to start getting comfortable with different variable types in terms of data, and also some of these different ideas of what we can do with an if statement to compare and how we can increment values, because it'll help us with other functions as well in the future. Okay, sorry if this video was a little long. I'm just trying to get everything together for our online learning and stuff that's coming up. Thanks.